Well, good evening, Life Groups Live. I don't know if you all are nervous like I am tonight. We've had 3 solid weeks leading up to tonight. A couple of weeks where I worked with our group leaders, and then last week our launch at the church. But something about this being the very first night, knowing that each of you are in your own respective groups and just hoping that everything goes well, knowing that we're live, and so anything that goes on live is going to go on live. We're going to have to work on it next week. Hopefully we have everything just working well this evening. So guys, I'm really pumped about this. Let's go ahead and get started right away. I want to take us tonight a little deeper into what we heard this morning in the 1020 service with Brother Branson preaching on Nebuchadnezzar setting up this image, this statue, this monument, and wanting the people to bow down and worship to him. And this next 15-20 minutes is going to be all about this principle, this concept that we've got to understand in spiritual warfare. I'm going to give you the principle right away, and we're going to break it down tonight. The principle is this. Let me see if I can pull it up for you on the screen. There we go. The devil's primary temptation is for us to worship ourselves. The devil's primary temptation is to get us to worship ourselves. So this is what's happening really let me get that off there. This is what's happening in Daniel chapter 3. It's what's happening in Genesis chapter 3. It's what's happening from the beginning to the end. It's what happened in Isaiah chapter 14 when the devil tried to rise up against God. We're going to look at some of these passages in a moment together. But what I want us to establish is that the heart of all temptation is found when we look at this concept in Daniel 3. The heart of all temptation is to get men to worship men. It's to get us to see ourselves as the supreme, highest end that deserves worship. We see this in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 5, when these exact words Satan said to Eve, "You will become like God." You know, what was it to be like God? He said knowing good and evil. But beyond simply knowing good and evil, to be like God means to have no authority over you. It means to make your own rules. It means that everybody else has to bow down to your wishes. And you will find in the heart of all of us, there is this desire to be like God. And because of that very reason, Satan pulls on that temptation, I would argue, above all else, that we worship ourselves. Look with me at Isaiah chapter 14. We're going to look at verses 12 through 15 here. How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn. This is a reference here to Satan. How you are cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. Above the stars of God, I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to Sheol, to the far reaches of the pit. Look at those words, I will make myself like the Most High. I will make myself like the Most High. All right. So this was what Satan, his original sin, was this prideful lifting up of wanting to be worshiped. He wanted everybody else to give to him the exact same thing that was meant only to be given to God. And in Daniel chapter 3, there's this classic picture of all of history, people worshiping other people, ultimately who have more power than them. This kneeling down and worshiping people who have power, people who have influence. On one hand, sure, there was probably a bunch of people who kneeled in fear. But what's really going on as these people are kneeling is this acknowledgement that somehow we worship people who rise to certain ranks. It creates this hunger within us to be in that seat. It creates this hunger within us to long for power. It creates this hope inside of us that one day, somehow, maybe we too can be worshiped, respected, revered, honored, just like Nebuchadnezzar. And so, almost instinctively, almost as if it were born into our very nature at birth, there's this sinful desire to worship man. Think about it. We dream about these things from the time we're children. Football players dream of being, worshipped. They dream of being on everybody's radar. They dream of catching the touchdown at the Super Bowl and the whole entire stadium and everyone on TV cheering for them. These are things we actually dream about as children. Or maybe it's middle school students these days and high school students that dream about having millions of followers. You look at the people that they admire, the people they worship. It's a very strong word. I'm going to deal with that word here in a little bit, but it's a strong word, and it at the heart, it's what we do. You look at how we worship people that have a big following, and part of us longs to be like they are because we long to be worshiped. We become infatuated with famous stars. We dream of being rich and powerful and having the influence, power, and ultimately control to do what we want, when we want, how we want, and we want everyone in our life to have this great admonition and respect for us. I'm telling you, brothers and sisters, there's this dangerous desire in us to be worshiped. And we tend to almost subconsciously worship those who are in the places we would like to be and do everything we can within our power to elevate ourselves to those same places of power and influence. Even our desire at times to be champions is something that is really masked, by this desire to be worshiped. We think, I want to just be part of a good team. We just want to win. We want to do this. We want to be successful. Team. But if you'll look at your heart, there's a certain part of you that really wants the credit, that wants to be awarded the praise and the glory that comes with being a champion. Now, we don't use those words in, raw and honest ways, but the reality is this is something that happens deep in the heart of all of us. And as we progress this forward, we're going to look at the danger of how this influences the Christian walk. I want to give you a quick side note. It's not really a rabbit trail, but I want to give you a quick side note, and that is that fame is fleeting. It's vanity. It's not real. I would argue that it doesn't actually exist. I want to show you a list of names. Let me pull these list of names up for you real quick. I'm curious how many of you know the names on the top four. You can talk about this later. You know what he needs to be responding at the moment. But Rick Warren, Matt Chandler, David Platt, Bill Hybel. Curious if you know any of those names, all of those names, a few of those names. Maybe they sound familiar, but you're not sure who they are. These four guys are some of the currently most successful, influential people in American Christianity right now. They are pastors that pastor huge congregations that are successful at what they do. Rick Warren has written The Purpose-Driven Life, sold more copies than any other book written in the history of the world other than the Bible. And Matt Chandler, David Platt, Bill Hybel, both these guys, incredible pastors that are making a huge difference for the kingdom. But my guess is that many of you had never even heard of them. Now look at this next list of people. I'm curious how many of these you know. India Moore, Marlon James, Leah Greenberg, Ezra Levin, Naomi Osaka, Tara Westover, Shep Dolman, Eileen Lee, Fred Swaniker. How many of you guys know who those people are? That second list, according to Time magazine, is the list of the most influential people on the planet in just the last 12 months. Not ever, but just now. Supposedly in the time frame that you and I are living in, those are the most famous people on earth, making the biggest difference and having the most influence upon the rest of us. I didn't know a single one of their names. And if there's one thing that I have learned over the years, it's that fame is an illusion. It's an illusion we all create to think that somehow there's a way to be great and to be known by the whole world and to be famous and powerful. And we're chasing an illusion. We've got to be willing to come down out of the clouds, recognize we were never meant to be there, recognize we've been duped by an enemy who wants us to believe that indeed, somehow, some way, we can pursue a life where all the glory is to us. It is the opposite of what we are created for. It is an endless cycle that never, ever satisfies. And we have got to see it is a lie to start with. It doesn't exist. You could have 1 million followers and nobody actually know who you are. So let's talk now quickly about the real life application. What does this matter to you and I? What does this look like in the Christian life? How does this manifest itself in our lives? I'm going to give you some quick practical ways that you can, if you'll be honest with yourself, ask yourself, are you guilty? And you'll find that you might be worshiping yourself more than you know. There's some ways. They're not all the ways, but these are some key ways that this mindset that I deserve to be worshiped and that I worship myself, it'll manifest itself in your life. If your thought life is dominated by what you want, if you're constantly thinking about what you want next, not satisfied with what you have now, but you want something more. You're thinking about your next purchase, your next vehicle, your next career move, your next home, you fill in the line. If you are constantly thinking about what you want, what you could possibly possess that would make you happier, there's a real good chance you're worshiping yourself a lot more than you know. Maybe you only want to serve if you get something out of it. This is a big one. I want to give an example that many of you are probably going to resonate with you, and then I'm going to ask you to apply it to yourself. But I want you to think about the teenager that is, you ask him to come help with the dishes. You ask him to help set the table, and you'll find that most often they don't want to. They're frustrated about it. They'd rather sit there and watch TV or stay on their phone. And there's almost a sense of frustration. You know what's really happening in that moment is we haven't taught our children to quit worshiping themselves. The idea is, even though it might be at a subconscious level, why would I do this? It doesn't benefit me. It's not about me. I don't get anything out of it. So why would I go and give of myself to serve someone else? Now, well, that's kind of an easy application to look to, and many of you can resonate with that. The truth is that often we're not a lot different as adults. And one of the keys, you want to know, Christian, are you worshiping yourself? Do you find yourself only serving when somewhere there's an ulterior motive that hopefully you get something out of it? If that's the case, you're not really serving God, you're serving yourself, serving your own interest. Another example would be being infatuated with people of power and longing to be like them. That's a good example. You're still worshiping people. Another one, and this is going to be hard for some of you to swallow, but if you're easily offended, that's a good indication you're worshiping yourself. If you're offended when you don't get the respect you think you should deserve, and I use that word deserve, right? I deserve respect. I deserve to be included. I deserve to be admired. I deserve to be applauded. I deserve, you fill in the blank. When you hear those words, I deserve, I deserve, I deserve, I deserve, that's what Nebuchadnezzar thought. That's what Satan told Eve. That's what Satan told himself. It's really kind of what Satan told Jesus in Matthew chapter 4, that if you'll bow down to me, I'll give you all these kingdoms. I mean, you deserve them. You shouldn't have to go through all the hard work of self-sacrifice and the cross and everything that's ahead of you. I mean, you deserve this now, Jesus. And he tried to appeal to that flesh side to ultimately get what we want. And when we do that, we're worshiping ourselves. It's interesting that Jesus' response was that it is written that you should worship none other than God. So if we're easily offended, that's a good example that we are still kind of trapped in this worshiping of ourselves. When we don't get the worship we want from others, we tend to give it to ourselves. And that's one of the main lessons that I wanted to share tonight, is that it's one thing for us to want worship from others, and we do, but you're going to find that our instinct is when we don't get what we want from people, we tend to try to do it for ourselves. We'll manipulate people and situations to get the outcomes that we want. We'll work hard, but we're really working for influence or power or maybe the wealth to purchase and manipulate something to get what we want. These are all indications, brothers and sisters, that we are much more guilty of worshiping ourselves, that we have bought the same bill of goods that Nebuchadnezzar bought, that we need to set up a monument to ourselves. We deserve this. We have earned it. And we need to take what we can and do what we can to build a monument to ourselves. And once we get it done, by golly, people better acknowledge it. They better bow down and worship. They better recognize who we are. While none of us have the same power that Nebuchadnezzar had, we do have the same earthly, fleshly heart. We're just not able to force the issue like he was. But the warning tonight, brothers and sisters, is that this is the primary, this is almost at the heart of every temptation. Take matters into your own hands and worship yourself. I want to finish with what I'm going to call an awakening principle. And this is the principle tonight. The sinful desire that I'm talking about to be worshiped, it's implanted to us by our parents. We don't have to develop it. It's there at birth. It doesn't have to be watered or nourished in order to grow. The desire is there, and the desire grows all by itself. The reason that's significant is because, with that being true, those whom Satan targets with these temptations are going to be those who are working to worship God. You and I. Another passage that was mentioned this morning is Ephesians chapter 6, when it tells us that we need to be equipped for the devil's schemes. Paul said something similar in 2 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 11 when he talked about we are not ignorant of the devil's schemes. And so if the devil is targeting you and I, and this is his primary thing that he uses to target us, what does it look like in the life of a Christian? He is subtle. He is sneaky. How does he tempt us to do Christian work, but secretly for the wrong motives? Let me give you some examples. Yeah, I want to use my voice to glorify God and sing for him. Maybe. Possibly instead, you really just want everybody to hear you sing and think that you're great. It's a motive of the heart. And it is in those places that our hearts at times will even be at battle, and we will have to fight to make sure that we do what we do for the right motive, for God's glory and not our own. You know, another musical example, I just want to use my gift to play an instrument for God's glory. Maybe. But how much of the time when you're using that gift are you thinking about what you look like? What people think about you? I just want to use my gift of administration to help the church expand. Maybe you do. Or maybe you want to use your gift to control and be in a place of influence because you like people seeing you as a person of power. These are the subtle temptations that we all must learn to recognize and fight off at any cost. I just want to have a large group in my, whether it be a church or small group for that matter. I just want a large group because that means more people are being ministered to. I don't dispute that numbers do matter and that if we're reaching people, our ministry should grow. But we must be honest and question the motive. Is it that we want a larger group because that means people are being ministered to, or because we want the glory that comes with having a large group? It comes down to motive. And this is where we all must be honest. The devil wants you and I to live for ourselves and to worship ourselves, and he's willing to let that happen even if it looks Christian, so long as the matter or the motive of the heart is selfish. Because one thing Satan knows, just like every other passage of Scripture, is that man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks on the heart. That's what matters to God. God knows why a person may sing on the stage. God knows why somebody may do the work they do. God knows why somebody may be ambitious about a certain ministry position. And we must all guard our hearts about wanting to be worshiped by people. And we must guard our hearts when we don't get that worship that we feel like we deserve, to not even take it a step further and begin worshiping ourselves and manipulating the situation. It's no wonder that Jesus said, if anyone wants to follow me, let him take up his cross and deny himself. It's no wonder that Paul said, I die daily. This is a daily war, brothers and sisters. The question is not so much, am I guilty of this or am I not? The question isn't, so do I worship God or do I worship myself? The question is, how much of your worship is pure for God and God only, and how much of it is about you? The goal is to get to the place that all of it is about God. And I want to encourage you, brothers and sisters, to be honest with yourselves. I pray that somehow, some way, God allows this to turn into some good discussion that follows. I want to encourage you guys to be honest with one another, be praying for one another. I love you guys, excited about these life groups, and I cannot wait to join you again next week. God bless and have a good night.